Listen up. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Louisville Urban League's radio show and podcast. My name is Lyndon Pryor. I am the Interim President and CEO of the Louisville Urban League. Welcome back to the pod. It is so good to be with you all again. Thank you for joining us every week. You can catch us on Thursdays from 12 to 12:30 on WLLV 101.9 FM or 1240 AM, or you can find us anytime on your favorite podcast channel. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. Let us know what you think about the show. And now you can also find us on YouTube, so please check us out. It is my sincere hope that after a little over a week of what has been incredible and unimaginable violence here in our city, that we are finding you with some measure of peace and strength, whatever it is that is going on in your world. Everybody in this city has been impacted by the events of the last 10 or 12 days or so. And so I hope that you are well, and I appreciate you taking the time that you have to join us here for a minute. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of those things that have been going on in our city and what are some pathways forward in that. And this week I am very excited to have with us a special guest, Circuit Court Judge Pryor and Edwards, who in full disclosure is a member of the Louisville Urban League board and has been a long friend of the league. But thank you, sir, for joining us. Welcome to the pod.
Mr. Pryor, thank you so much, and congratulations on your current role. Well deserved, and I know you've hit the ground running. A lot on your plate, but you're up for the job, so I know. I'm
doing my best, and thank you so much for the support. So we're gonna jump right in, and as I shared, it's just a conversation, so we're gonna talk about a lot of different things, I'm sure. But first and foremost is, you've been in Louisville, for a while, well known around Louisville for a while. But for folks who don't know, one of the places I always like to start is kind of give us the quick and dirty on who is Judge Pryor and Edwards, and how did you arrive to the place that you are right now?
Sure. So Louisville is home for me. I was born here in Louisville, born in the West End on South 45th Street. My parents are no longer here, but they are not Louisville natives. They moved here in the early 1960s and started their family. I got two older sisters. Both my parents were educators. They worked at Central High School for the majority of their careers. And I went to JCPS schools, graduated, and went up to Illinois, attended Northwestern University, finished up there where I studied political science and African American studies. Decided after that to come back to Kentucky for law school. Went to the University of Kentucky for law. Met my wife there, and we got married. Came back here to my hometown of Louisville and began our careers in the law. I started off as a public defender here at the Jefferson County Public Defender's Office, and did that for about 3 years. And after that, I joined up with two more seasoned attorneys who became great mentors for me, the late Darrell Owens and the late John Stewart. And they had office. We're here at the Urban League offices now, and their office was right down the street, 13th and Broadway. Mm-hmm. So I practiced with them for a few years, and then I decided it was time to spread my wings a little bit and set up a shop over in Old Louisville, along with former Urban League CEO Sadiqa Reynolds, and we practiced law together, and I stayed in private practice after leaving the public defender's office for about 10 years. I continued to do quite a bit of criminal defense work, handled everything from speeding tickets to capital murder cases. Did some teaching out at the University of Louisville, and I was kind of in a hybrid professional role. I was teaching full time at the university and practicing law in 2009 when I was fortunate enough to get appointed to a vacancy on the circuit bench by Governor Steve Beshear. And I was appointed in 2009. I had to run to retain the seat in 2010. I was fortunate enough to win that contested race, and I have had the privilege to serve ever since. So when you don't find me in court or working on the job that the people have elected me to serve, you find me usually on a soccer field somewhere. I got 2 sons that play soccer. One still plays, one doesn't play anymore. But I also am one of the co-directors and founders of the West Louisville Soccer Club, which is something near and dear to my heart that I never miss an opportunity to plug anytime, particularly if there's a microphone in front of me. So,
well, absolutely. And so you mentioned Sadiqa, who is yet to have the opportunity to grace the pod, but she always would tell us the exploits of her time in private practice. So if you want to share quickly, what was that experience like? And not just working with her, but just in particular, I mean, if you want to share fun stories about working with her, that's also great. But particularly about, the work that you did as a criminal defense attorney or at the public defender's office.
Sure. It starting off as a public defender was a wonderful experience, a great way for someone right out of law school, a brand new attorney, to really get a feel for practicing law. They don't hold you back over there. It's no pun intended, trial by fire, and they throw you right in. I was trying the most serious of cases. I had murder cases within a year and a half of having passed the bar. And it was a great way to learn how to practice law, to be around a group of folks who were experienced and supportive, and to really start learning what our criminal justice system is about, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When I went into private practice, I still, as I stated earlier, continue to do quite a bit of criminal defense work. Being someone who grew up, who was born and raised here in Louisville, being a black man, practicing law, particularly practicing criminal defense, was a privilege. I saw people who a lot of society want to label just as bad people, who want to label, is even worse, with a lot of derogatory words and names and labels. But I saw a lot of people who weren't necessarily bad people, but who had perhaps done bad things or were just in a bad place in their life. And I took pride in working with them to try to get them second chances, opportunities to make good and to make up for perhaps some of the worst decisions they ever made. Because as I tell people, I love talking to kids. They always ask, how do you represent such bad people? And I always say, hey, the people I represent did bad things quite possibly, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad people.
Absolutely.
And that we're all human. We're all people who have faltered, and that we're all entitled to have an opportunity to show that our worst days, our worst decisions are not necessarily who we are. So, working as a criminal defense attorney was something that I took pride in.
And how does that now inform your role as a jurist, right, in terms of sitting on the bench?
It certainly has impacted the way that I carry out my responsibilities. Being a judge is very different than being a criminal defense attorney. I remind younger judges, people who are just starting off, that you have to put away that role of being an advocate, because that's not what I am there to do. I'm no longer advocating for one side. I'm advocating for justice, if that makes any sense, and that requires doing a balancing. There is a place for punishment. There are times where punishment has to be severe. There are times where you have to hold people accountable for their wrongdoings, but there's also a place for compassion. There's a place for grace. There's a place for second chances, and you have to balance those things out to try to fashion some sort of disposition that does all of the above.
So in thinking about that, right? Like historically, I don't. This is not an opinion. Like factually, we can say that historically, the system has not always held Black people in particular, but also other marginalized groups in fair regard. That justice hasn't always been something that is equal. In your experiences, do you see that arc bending into better places? Are we moving in a space or in a direction that you feel is better for us when you take into account like the entire history of what the justice system has been in this country?
Sure. Yes. Let me start by saying we have a long way to go. There's a lot of progress that needs to be made, but I've seen progress since the time that I began practicing law. Let me point to a couple of concrete examples. One would be felony expungement, and I know the league has been at the forefront of a lot of efforts to get individuals before courts to have their cases expunged. Kentucky was one of the states that was very, very behind when it came to really understanding that felonizing people, precluding them from doing the things that all citizens have a right to do for the entirety of their lives is just backwards thinking, and it's something that needed to be changed. When I started practicing law, Kentucky had no felony expungement. So that means, someone who was caught at the time, theft, shoplifting, over $300. If you stole something that was $305 and you got a felony conviction, if you got caught with certain drugs, not selling them, just possessing them, if you fell behind on your child support, if you wrote a bad check for over $300 and you caught a felony conviction for any of those things, that felony conviction would stay with you for the rest of your life. It would impede your ability to get employment. You couldn't volunteer at your kids' schools. You couldn't vote. All of those things, all those opportunities were now closed to you. And since then, that's changed. We have a number of provisions, a number of offenses, felony offenses that are now eligible for expungement, which allows individuals to, again, become fully participating members of our community, to vote, to participate at their kids' schools, to be free from those impediments on job opportunities. So that's progress, because as we know, there's we've been disproportionately, our community, the Black community, has been disproportionately overrepresented when it comes to folks catching these felony cases. So that's one solid example. Another, when I started practicing, the primary drug epidemic that we were dealing with was crack cocaine. And there was no discussion of folks who were addicted to crack cocaine of that whole epidemic as being a public health crisis. It was a straight criminal problem. Folks were catching felony cases for having residue, crack cocaine residue. Those were not being amended to misdemeanors. So you had people with tiny amounts of cocaine being given these felony convictions, again, that could not be expunged. No one cared about getting them help. No one thought about, hey, what's going on? How are their kids gonna thrive? What's going on here? How do we break that cycle? No, it was just put these people in prison, and that's changed. A lot of reasons for that. Yeah. Some good, some bad, and the same with the felony expungement thing. That's brought odd bedfellows together. You have Chamber of Commerce people working with the ACLU. You don't see that a lot. Right. All pushing for broader broader opportunities for people to get their cases expunged. But ultimately, the goal and the end game is we're having more people being able to return to society in a positive way. We're having more people being able to get help for their addictions as opposed to simply being punished for them. And those are positive things.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to something you talked about in terms of your background and being having a degree in African American studies. You're certainly well aware in Kentucky and lots of other places around the country, there has been this push against what some, they are loosely referring to CRT, which we know is not, they're really not actually talking about CRT, but essentially anything that would promote or educate students around the realities and the real histories of this country, which unfortunately include the subjugation and oppression of Black people, but also honestly oftentimes disregards a lot of the positive influence and impact of African Americans. And I just wonder for you kind of what your thoughts are on how that conversation is taking shape as somebody who I imagine can see the impact of that knowledge or the absence of that knowledge on what you currently do in terms of, the justice system and whatnot, but also as, just somebody who is the son of educators and who appreciates the value of what a full and robust education means for society.
Yeah. I used the phrase earlier in a different context, the good, bad, and ugly, but that's what education has got to be. When we're teaching kids and the things that they are exposed to and taught, they need to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly about the history of this country, because there's a lot of all three. And, to try to sanitize it, to protect students from learning the bad and the ugly is doing a disservice to our young people. And it's dangerous. It is frankly just dangerous because let me give this example. When I taught in the Pan-African Studies department at U of L, one of the things that I would start off a lot of my classes with, particularly when I was talking about race and law in the disproportionate numbers of African Americans incarcerated, I would always start with the example of, and I would put certain words on the chalkboard because I'm old. We used chalkboards back then. But I would use words like lazy, dumb, over-sexualized, these stereotypes of Black folks, particularly Black men that we saw coming out of the books and a lot of classic books and movies. And I would ask my students for a show of hands. I said, how many people believe that these are attributes that are more likely to be owned by Black men than by white men? And of course, no one raised their hands. Nobody wanted to admit that, they believe that Black folks are dumb or Black folks are lazy or that. And then I would then put some statistics up about the number of Black folks in prison for offenses that would be derivative of those adjectives. Okay. And I'd say, if you don't believe that Black folk are inherently more inclined to be these things, then how do we get to this place? And the only answer is the structural racism. Okay. The only answer then, because you've taken away the fact that these folks are inherently more likely to do these things. So then the question becomes, well, why do they seem to be disproportionately inclined to be incarcerated for these things? In order to answer that question, you have to look into the history of this country, the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow, the history of redlining, all of these things that have historically created these impediments towards opportunity and success and have created this kind of cauldron that is going to create these types of behaviors. Okay, and then you top off, all of that with over policing, those types of things that we can get into a little bit later. And these are things that people need to learn about. And these are the things that James Baldwin talked about, and that Ralph Ellison talked about, Richard Wright talked about in their books that now people don't want anybody to be able to read.
Right.
So.
And so, like, you can, because I feel like it's important. I brought up CRT, but I think it's apropos to be talking to a law person about this, because CRT, critical race theory, was essentially a theory, or really not even necessarily a theory, but a train of study by Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell, designed really to do what you just talked about, to say, let's look at specifically the law, like, because that's where it started, was in legal studies, if I understand correctly, that it was really for law school students to say, like, let's look at all the laws that we have on the books, and let's look at the history in which those laws came into being, and say, like, all right, it is hard to subtract or extract the fact that what we were doing from a race perspective colors or impacts what laws were being put into place, and then how those laws are being implemented. And so it wasn't even so much a matter of judgment, right? Like good or bad. It's just simply saying, like, this is what happened. And then for students, legal students, to be able to say, like, all right, now what do we do with that? Or what does that mean? Would that be an adequate summation of what CRT actually is?
Sure. And let me, Derek Bell, former, brilliant law professor and mentor to everyone from Barack Obama, Charles Ogletree. He talked about those exact things that you just spoke of, looking into, going all the way back to some of the slave fugitive laws, and how these things were put into place in order to marginalize, effectively just to keep a group of people in their place.
Mm-hmm. So, all of that, I think, is great context for how we now understand and see kind of the judicial system and the whole legal apparatus in total. Everything from policing through sentencing, and quite frankly, even post-sentencing, paroles and expungements, and how those things happen. Like, all of that gets shaped by this historical context. And I bring that up because obviously, we're going to talk about the recent events, the most recent events in Louisville, but prior to, a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago at this point, we were really wrangling with this DOJ report, and what has happened in our local police department, and the types of infractions and harm that has been done for so long disproportionately against Black people. And I love to always lift up, they are not the only people who have been harmed as per that report, but disproportionately the Justice Department has said that that Black people have bore the brunt of poor policing in this community. What were your thoughts, or have been your thoughts on that report thus far?
It was a heartbreaking report. This is my community. This is where I was born. This is where I chose to come back, and this is where I have spent my entire professional career. And in this field of the criminal justice system, this is where I've spent my entire professional career working within. So seeing that report from an outside agency, bringing in the perspective of, the context of looking at Louisville, not just in a vacuum, but looking at Louisville compared to looking at other similar cities and other locations, and asking the questions of, how could this city be doing it differently? How could it be better? and seen, the answers to that. That was tough. That was tough to read. Yet it wasn't surprising. My perspective is not just as a circuit court judge, but my perspective is of, a black man who grew up as someone who was racially profiled and who was pulled over, back in the 1980s. I heard the stories that my parents would tell, about things that they experienced, things that they had students experience that they thought well of. And we talked a little bit about some of the things that have changed positively over the years. But there's a lot that hasn't changed, that report, if that report was done, instead of in 2023, if it was done in 1983, I don't know if it would have been that much different, Yeah. And, I wish I had a simple solution and answer, but this is something that has been building for generations, and there has to be some real reckoning by a lot of folk, and some deep commitment to making some substantive cultural changes, if we really want a Louisville that our kids and grandkids, that for them will be different.
In that report, it covers the gamut of things, and unfortunately, I think it implicates even other judges, right, and folks in the who are part of the court process here. How do you as a jurist take that, right? Like, how does that resonate for you and your colleagues on the bench?
Our colleagues are concerned, and we don't want to be a part of the problem. We are public servants, and we all have different backgrounds and experiences that bring us to our roles. But at our core, we all are there to serve, and we want to do right by the public, not just a portion, but the entire community. I'll speak for myself. Anything that I can do to, I'm always cognizant of the decisions that I make, what goes into that, and how am I being impacted by perhaps some subtle prejudices that I may have, even as a black man. How am I being impacted by things that should not impact, the way that I dispense justice? How can I work collaboratively with my colleagues, if need be, and perhaps help younger judges through the process of making some of these difficult decisions when it comes to sentencing, what goes into the way that I handle sentences and how I balance those things I talked about earlier. I want to get better. I feel that I don't wake up any day thinking, what, I want to go in here and not be fair today. I never do that. But I also don't wake up every day saying I'm perfect. I'm going to try. And every day I want to be able to go home and lay my head down knowing that I did my best to be, to serve the public and to be fair to everyone.
Are there things that, and I know this sometimes for judges, it gets into a kind of a dicey place, right? Like, you all have to maintain impartiality. And so feel free to pass but are there things that you see that can improve, whether that be from a specific standpoint of policy and or practice, and that's whether you're talking about LMPD or in terms of that interaction with the bench? Are there things that you would recommend?
There's been discussions about, obviously the search warrant process was a big discussion in those reports. Transparency is huge. When I am reviewing a search warrant, when I'm swearing in an officer to tell me what's going on, why they believe that there's probable cause for the issuance of this warrant. That needs to be transparent, and that should not be done. In the past, a lot of that stuff went on in chambers and back without a record on, and I don't think that that's good policy. I don't think that that's appropriate. I think it needs to be out there. I think it puts, transparency is what our court system is supposed to be all about. And this is an important, very important phase in the process, the search warrant phase, and I don't think that it deserves any less transparency than a trial or a bond hearing or anything like that. It needs to be public.
Thinking about now the recent events, so the shooting at Old National, as well as the shooting at JCTC outside of the spot, and then the most recent shooting over in Chickasaw Park. Louisville, while we, I guess, now have the national spotlight and some level of attention, we are not new to gun violence. Unfortunately, it has been a rising epidemic in our community for the last several years at least, but I mean, I'd say for as long as I've been here almost 9 years. And so it has been a huge problem. And there are lots of problems, right? Like there are lots of contributing factors to that, right? We talk about poverty being a huge one, access to resources, lots of different things. But there is one constant across all of those things, which is the prevalence of guns in our community. How do you feel about where we are as a community, and I'll say community locally, but also as a state and nationally, if you want to get into that, with our relationship and what I tend to say is just infatuation with guns and gun prevalence?
So I really do not think that it's productive to be someone who kicks the can down the road and points fingers and who casts blame away. I think there's accountability that a lot of people need to accept when it comes to this issue. That being said, I'm in the third branch of government, the judicial branch. I don't make laws. We have prosecutors. We have police officers who are charged in their role within the executive branch of enforcing the laws that are out there. And I think that both the executive branch and the judicial branch are limited in what we can do to address these situations, because we don't have the tools at our disposal to do so. So long way of saying I'm pointing blame at our legislative branch, because they are the branch that is supposed to act as the voice of their constituents. And you can take 5 minutes and do a quick little poll, research for polls from the Pew Foundation or you name it. And there are some basic things regarding gun ownership. Background checks at gun shows, prohibiting the sales to folks who don't pass background checks for mental health issues, things that are not controversial. They are nonpartisan changes that I don't know if they would change a whole lot, but they can't even get those things enacted.
Right.
I mean, we're talking 80-90% of the public say, yeah, that would be a good idea. And they can't get those things done. I was on a panel, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago, and it was talking about gun violence amongst youth. And we talked on that panel about how you could go into certain neighborhoods and it's harder to get a beer Harder for a 15-year-old to get a beer than it is for he or she to get a gun.
Wow.
And I don't think that's changed. You know, you can talk to any 15, go outside here, find 15, 16-year-old, say, hey, if you want to get a gun, do you think you could get one within a week? I bet you the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah.
What are we doing where guns are that available to 15 and 16-year-olds? And I don't want to hear this, oh, well, the problem with guns is people aren't locking their cars and they're getting stolen out of their cars. Yet, well, who's stealing these assault rifles, these AR-15s that I see young people coming into court with?
Right.
Not physically, but charges related to their possession of these type of things.
Yeah.
Where are they getting them? Where are they getting them? Who is being held responsible for putting these guns literally in the hands of these young people? And I'm not talking just about, you know, and so I'm going beyond the Old National shooting. I'm talking about the day in and day out gun violence that I see. And I grow, you know, I grow weary as a lot of folks in this city of seeing this, because I wonder, how are y'all getting these guns?
Right.
How are y'all getting them? And I'll end with this. And this is direct from my experience as a former criminal defense attorney. Someone gets caught, a young person gets caught with some cocaine and 3 guns. They can get that charge mitigated, perhaps even dismissed if they snitch about where they got the cocaine. No one asked them. They don't even ask where they got the guns because it's almost assumed, well, everybody's got a gun. You know, what are we doing? What are we doing when we have these laws on the books that can send people to prison for 5-10 years and give them these felony convictions for just having cocaine? But the same folk, you know, have many arsenals of guns, and it's as if we don't even care.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that from the league perspective, we are looking at all the different ways in which legislative bodies can do more. And I'm going to get to the community part of this, but on not just legislative bodies, but in talking about enforcement on this, is that issue one of, is that the police not asking? Is that prosecutors not asking around the question about guns? Is like, who should be asking that question?
Yeah. I think the reason that they don't ask as much is, in my going on 14 years on the bench and in my 13 years before that as a practitioner, I never saw anyone in state court ever charged with trafficking in guns. So from a police officer's perspective, I can ask, and who's selling these guns to you? Where's that going to lead? Right. But I can ask, who's selling these, you know, this cocaine to you? And that's going to lead to an arrest and a conviction. So I think that goes into it. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier. We need some real attention given to the issue of where are these guns coming from? Who is putting these guns in these young people's hands? And then we need to have that reckoning. Are you okay with that? Do you think it's okay for a 16-year-old to be able to have assault rifles? You know, and if you do think that that's okay, then perhaps the voters can hold you accountable the next time you're up for election.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that, you know, kind of pivoting into a different side of this conversation is, and I'll just share like my personal belief is, every time the gun conversation comes up, there are these folks who raise up and, you know, and basically say there's nothing we can do, right? Like, which I for one have just for a long time just say is dumb, right? Like and I think we have to, and you don't have to say that. I know you know you're an elected official, you don't want to call people dumb, but I think at some point we have to start saying that some arguments around this are just dumb. In a world where we are the only developed nation that sees gun deaths and just gun incidents at the rate at which we do, to suggest that, nothing can be done when somehow the rest of the world has managed to figure this out. I just think it's dumb, right? Like, or disingenuous. And probably it's a little of both. That said, I think that there are also ways in which, we as community members also have to, begin to think about our role in this, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, as a Louisville native, as somebody who's grown up in our community, and as somebody who has seen a lot of folks who look like you and I, before him on the wrong end of this issue, what is it that you have to say to us, right? Like to us as neighbors, as community members, as parents, as individuals, in terms of our role in this entire fight?
As parents, we got to hold our kids accountable. Got to know where our kids are. Okay. And I know it's not easy, and I know folks have stressors on them that are beyond what a lot of us can even imagine. But the effort has to be there in holding our kids accountable. You okay? And knowing where they're at. I mean, what I see in front of me, we're starting. I've had 13-year-olds in front of me, 13-year-olds in circuit court. That's I don't even know what the words are for that. I think at some point we need, hearkening back to what I was saying, we need our legislators to pass the types of laws that can really help protect our community. We need our prosecutors and police officers to, not just want to be punitive and to incarcerate, but to really be engaged and to help our community. We need our judges, myself included, to be engaged and to be forceful when need to be, and compassionate when that need presents itself too. But at the end, but beyond all of that, you talked to me a little bit about my Black Studies teaching, and I studied it in college. And when I was learning and reading, about the thoughts of Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, and what they really emphasized is we can hope all of those things, but at some point we have to take matters into our own hands and to develop our own institutions and to be accountable within our own community,
Right.
and to provide these opportunities, provide this support for our own, and not be dependent and waiting on outside help to save the day. So we those of us in positions who are blessed with the opportunities to do things, to provide opportunities, we need to step up. We need to step up. And I know you're doing it here at the league. You could be doing a lot of different things with your intellect and your qualifications and credentials, and you have chose to put your time and talent towards this organization that is doing those things. And we need more folks doing that, creating institutions, creating opportunities for kids, helping to fill the void for where perhaps they're not where maybe they're not getting what they need from home.
Absolutely. And just showing up, right? Like for folks. And I think that is what, the folks here at the league are trying to do. And I know that there are tons and tons of other partners out there on the ground that are doing the same. And those efforts have to be invested in. And so I guess that gets back to, the folks who are in positions of power and privilege, making sure that we are investing in the efforts that are happening so that those things can be scaled and we can reach more people, but it is a multi-pronged approach, right? Like I hate to ever get caught in the trick bag of like, oh, just blaming one thing on this. It's a multi-pronged issue, and it's something that's going to take a multi-pronged response. I think from this seat, though, it is just a matter of making sure that the folks who are on the hook for the policy, for the practice, for the implementation, that they don't get let off the hook for the role that they have played in this. And it is a significant role because, to your earlier point, like folks can be engaged and be paying attention to your kids as much as you can. But I mean, if there's literally a gun at every corner, like that is a very steep hill to climb for anybody, for the best and most engaged or well-intended adult. That is just a hard reality to have to deal with. And so we've got to get our arms around that as much as possible. Now, I'll also say, and I don't know how much of this you get to see in your seat, but, just for the audience that, in Kentucky, at least this year and thus far, for as much as we talk about homicides, we have had more accidental deaths and suicides this year than we've had those, right? And so gun violence is a part of those things as well. And so even if you're not wanting to talk about if somehow homicide isn't something that you are concerned about, suicides, accidental shootings, right? Like those are things that happen all the time in our community. Gunshots are the leading cause of child death in this country. And that just, at some point, that should be just really unacceptable for us as a society. And I don't know what it's going to take for us to get there, but we're going to keep pushing. Yeah. Before we get out of here, one of the questions that I love to ask people, in particular, I love to ask Louisville natives, because I appreciate, people's affinities for their hometown, and particularly folks who have chose to return and to plant roots there and to commit themselves to it. But the question I ask is, what is your hope for your city?
I want to see, our city has been, and I don't remember who coined it, referred to as a compassionate city. I want us to live up to that name. I want folks to being compassionate. I don't think people understand that's not just about feeling sorry or being nice, but it's about being supportive. It's about being engaged. It's about not casting judgment. Not looking at this section of town. Ooh, we don't want to go there. It's dangerous. Folks over there are crazy. We're not going to deal with them. It's about figuring out a way. Look, instead of just putting them down, instead of being judgmental, what can we do? Mm-hmm. How can we start bridging some of these gaps that we have in this city? How can we make parents from all segments of this city feel comfortable sending their kid to school, feeling that their kid can get the type of quality education that will prepare them to go to college and beyond? That should be something that everyone in every corner of this city feels that they can do. That's compassion, filling those voids. How should we make it so that every kid here in the city feels safe when they go to the bus stop and are waiting on the bus? That's compassion, okay? As we've seen this past week, we have people, we have good people in this city, people who are empathetic, but we need to figure out a way to channel those feelings of empathy into action every day, not just when tragedy occurs.
Absolutely. Well, Thank you, Judge Edwards, for being with us. Thank you for the service that you have provided this community as a public defender, as a defense attorney, now as a judge, as a board member of the Louisville Urban League, and just a staunch community advocate. Your voice, your presence, it matters. And I hope you know and feel that it has resonance in this community and will reverberate for generations to come, because it means something for people to be able to see you in the role that you have and in the seat that you occupy. And so thank you for that. Thank you for always being an outspoken advocate, certainly for this organization, but for Black people as well. And we just look forward to being able to continue to work in the partnership. As you know, anything that the league can do, anything that I can do, we are always here and looking forward to working together to make this the space that you talk about, a place where people can learn, live, and thrive unimpeded. And so thank you very much for your time here.
Much appreciate the invitation to come and spill a little bit what's on my mind. So.
Anytime, you are certainly welcome to come back. And next time, actually, I may have to get you and Sadiq on here at the same time. Maybe let y'all share some stories from.
We're gonna sign a non-disclosure before we do that. But all right. All right, appreciate you, sir.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on Listen Up, the Louisville Urban League's radio show and podcast. Again, you can catch us every week. This show drops on Thursdays at 12 p.m. You can catch us live on the radio, 101.9 WLLV or 1240 a.m. Or catch us at any point in time on your favorite podcast station. Be sure to subscribe, rate us, review us, let us know what you think. Please, everyone, have a safe and healthy week moving forward, and we'll catch you next time.
Louisville Urban League's Kentuckiana Builds program is your introduction to the skills trades that lead to careers in construction, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, and HVAC. This 6-week hands-on and technical education program provides training for job seekers to earn 3 national credentials, JCTC credit, all while connecting employers with a qualified, skilled workforce. This innovative partnership is funded by Kentuckiana Works and the Kentucky Education and Workforce Development Cabinet. For more information, visit lul.org/jobs.
The Louisville Urban League wants to make sure that every student thrives academically, and to make that possible, the league is offering free intensive tutoring to JCPS students who qualify. Kindergarten through 12th grade students can receive expert help in reading, math, and ACT prep. Kids like me deserve every opportunity to succeed and to reach our greatest potential. Sign your student up today. To learn more, visit lul.org or call 502-585-4622.